Wasn't it so much easier before you started reading this book? Oh, we could just believe everything we read in Acts. You got the new one. You're cheating because yours has about 8,000 less pages than this one. Yeah, yeah. Oh, where are the footnotes? You got to go out and get the footnotes on the website. I suppose you have another one there too. Yeah, okay. Think of that. I don't suppose you got any of my books up there on your shelf. Oh, that's more like it. Look at her going at it now, looking for books. There's another one. And another one. No wonder I'm so rich. Oh my goodness. But look, she's the understudy here. She's expected to have all these books and know them thoroughly. Because I'm thinking that one of these nights I'll be on this thing and I will just fall asleep in the biblical sense. I'll just go. And then Alice and Gary will have to take over from that point on. Now, do you wonder what Eisenman's talking about when he quotes the Habakkuk Pesher and makes Paul out to be the spouting liar? And what is it that Paul keeps saying? I don't lie. I'm not lying. I always wonder, what exactly is the lie all about? Well, I found this book from '85, The Mythmaker, Paul in the Invention of Christianity. It's written by Chaim Maccoby, who is a Pharisee. And what he says Paul is lying about, not knowing this other book, of course, I don't know whether I really want to disclose. Curious, isn't it? Well, just found one kind of a melding of these two books here. What do you really believe? I believe Acts just like it says, honestly. I believe Acts is a teaching manual for learning about the work of the Spirit on earth. I don't feel like it needs to be realistic history to bring forth what it's trying to accomplish. Just too many ifs, too many Simeons, too many Judases, just too many. I think the writer of Acts, personally, I'm thinking that it's Epaphroditus that wrote this book. I think, who else in the world? And there's so many borrowings from Josephus, characters, situations. Isn't it true that Josephus dedicated his vita, his life, his autobiography to Epaphroditus? Might be. Maybe we have something there. But we really get into the crux here in this one of more name games. And I think that if we just would get through the first chapter sometime, every paragraph is important. And every paragraph is like, what do they say? An enigma wrapped in a frisky, wrapped in a can of I can't remember that dog food. We used to dig out of the can for dogs. What was the name of that stuff? Oh, it's been on my mind for a long time. Something like that. It's like It's like getting down to the bottom of a Cracker Jack box and then finding a little envelope with a piece of paper in it instead of a real toy. That's how I feel about it. A little piece of paper, like today, you peel it out and it's like a tiny little tattoo that you lick and put on your arm. What kind of a toy is that? What kind of a prize is it? It says right on it, toy prize. Used to be a little army man or something in there like that. Oh, I know you're probably too young to remember. That is the biggest treat in the world when you get through all that stale popcorn and you're going to pick out of your teeth the rest of the day to get a nice toy. I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old, there was a cereal box that had a nice toy that you could get. Well, it was in the box. It was 2 knights on horses. You put a rubber band in and twisted it up, and you put them at 2 sides of a table, and these things come rushing each other and bang like that. What do you get now? Nothing but some little piece of paper. It's disgusting how cheap this world's got. There was even this one cereal, some oddball cereal that had in it a big plastic statue of a historic figure. You could collect, like Eric the Red. I remember that. There was like Bluebeard, one of the Barbary pirates, Leif Erikson, Cincinnatus. What cool little things you could have. Then there were my father got on the Christmas tree one year, a lead soldier. Okay. We didn't figure out in our family, I think it was passed down in the family. We couldn't understand why so many of our relatives were going insane after playing with that thing and then chewing off a piece of it. No toys today. Books are toys. You buy books, put them up on the shelf, don't really play with them, you don't even read them. And so it becomes a habit as strong as opium. Just buying these books is just cheaper, that's all. We're going to encounter a bunch of characters. I don't suppose this will go as long as usual, but the characters are really interesting. Got to get through the first chapter at least before we quit this craziness. But this material is hard. It is not easy, and all the nuances of speech in here, and at the same time, Eisenman makes these, well, they're not quite claims. He's not tenacious about anything he claims in here. He is tentative. You know, he's very proud of the things he's found, but he still won't own any of them. And, yeah, well, look at what my shirt says today. Where do you think I got this shirt, Allison? I cannot live without books. Yeah, Monticello. They're in Virginia. I would say that Robert Eisenman, who I know well now, he knows that he's famous. And he's got like an aura about him now. Everybody hates him but his friends. And he kind of doesn't have any friends except people in the Jihad. He likes them. So much fun to be with him last April. Honest to goodness. I paid for it too. I was sick over there in Kansas when I went, and then came down to Oklahoma to Tulsa. We did a series of meetings. He did an interview for my friend Steve Tremble. He was very reticent about doing an interview because Steve's not a professional journalist or anything like that. So at the beginning of the interview, you know, he's complaining about, well, I might do 20 minutes. He says, oh, how long is this going to last? What's your name again? Are you a professional? That. And Steve's going, he said, what if I just get up now and go to my room? And then he gets into this interview and he blows on for 2.5 hours. I put the interview up for anybody to listen to. And then I got a terse email from him. Take that down, that's got personal material on it. Okay, well, why did you do it in the first place? So here it is, still back in a file here, where he's telling all his secrets from his all these trips and everything and all this other information. Of course, I was asleep for 2 hours and 15 minutes of it. He's a great guy. I just love him. He knows I'm just giving him a little roast right now. I never thought I would meet the guy, much less be kind of a pal of his. Never thought of it. After studying his books for 25 years, and then all of a sudden him descending out of the Shamayim into the Yahad on Facebook, and then doing some projects together, then actually going out and speaking on the same venue. Wow. It was like Melchizedek came down. Honestly. It was like Melchizedek came down, and I got to see him. Better than Melchizedek. Okay, I've done enough of that. I mean, it's ridiculous. From one old man to some old people here. I wouldn't be surprised if my phone started ringing right now. Let's get into the crux of the name game. See if I can read my notes here. The Hellenists section of the Antiochian church, which we talked about last week. I use the word church on purpose. Ecclesia, or we would say in Hebrew, edah, meaning a congregation, or we might say even from the scrolls, Yahad, included Herodians. We kind of pass over that. We read in, especially the Gospels, that the Herodians are pretty much the enemies. Well, the Herodians had the master killed and had James killed. At least they were behind it. And they were certainly behind collaborating with the Romans to keep their power. But we're talking about here primarily in Acts 11:16, where certain of the prophets and teachers of Antioch are unmasked. And you will certainly note that Robert does use terms out of Acts and even Paul that Well, the terms are certain ones or certain of the, a kind of a code word right there for here are some people that might be important, but we're really not going to do any more than do their names because they're certain ones. In fact, the apostles in Galatians are considered certain ones too. And in Corinthians, hyper apostles, super apostles, big celebrities, touted by Paul as though not only he was just calling them super apostles, but he recognized that they were, and he wasn't there yet. But one of those is Timothy Titus. Were these two people? Don't know. But one, Titus, is a derivative or a making smaller of Timothy, like Silvanus and Silas, or Epaphroditus and Epaphras, or Aristobulus and Eubulus. They're all the same name, but they're diminutive, there it is, of that name. So we have Timothy Titus, who has a Jewish mother and a Greek father. Eisenman says, no doubt, Timothy Titus had such a standing because he was certainly a descendant of one of Herod the Great's Jewish wives, one of those being Mariamne and the other one being Mariamne. Mariamne, the princess of the Maccabees, whom he murdered, and the other Mariamne, who I think was a Samaritan, you can check me out there, who he also had murdered. So he had two wives of the same name, had them both murdered, ended the Maccabean line insofar as he could. He murdered his two children by her as well, Alexander and Aristobulus, had them both drowned. So Robert says that Timothy Titus was, he says, hedges his bets, but perhaps or could certainly be descendants of Herod's wives, and here they are as part of the Hellenist contingency of the Antiochian church. We have another one of these teachers and apostles called Silas. I just mentioned him, Silvanus, who along with the ignominious Judas Barsabas brought letters, I don't know, look it up, you tell me, brought letters from James to Antioch regarding overseas communities. That's in Acts 15:27. Josephus, in the same time frame, speaks of a Silas as commander of King Agrippa's bodyguard, probably Agrippa II. I think Agrippa I died of stomach cancer or worms in maybe 44. This might be a little later, might be Agrippa II. Silas as a bodyguard. Thus, this Silas could also well be one of the Herodians from Agrippa's bodyguard, and one of the characters that the writer of Acts takes out of Josephus. I might also add something that he didn't put in here, is there is a text in Nag Hammadi library, in the Gnostic library, called Silvanus, or the letter of Silvanus, which I retranslated, and I call it the letter of Zillah to his son. When I retranslated, it took a whole complete different form. Instead of just a philosophical talk with the son of Silvanus, what it appears to be is this father trying to talk his son out of teaming up with the zealots in Sicarii and coming back to Jewish philosophy or Jewish religion, which Sylvanus doesn't consider to be, doesn't consider the rebels, the zealots, to be any more part of Judaism. It's only 16 chapters. It's worth reading and listening to. I think I'll just put a link up here. You can, if you want to really do something, you can go look at the consensus translation of Sylvanus from the Nag Hammadi library and compare it with what I got. You find something quite different. Yeah, it's part of the Earth course. Hold on just a second. Let me look up the audio anyway. And it's not very long, but it sure seems like he's talking about getting his son out of an army camp or a wilderness camp or a military, quasi-military establishment where he's learning to kill people instead of devils. Okay, I'm going to find it here. I might as well say, you get it free anyway. You might as well listen to it. Because it's there. Paste. And it took me a long time to translate that anyway, and it was a lot of work. Let me see if I can find the actual text. Yeah. The way you'll find it interesting, like I said, is this puts another spin on Sylvanus or Josephus Silas or Paul's companion. He would have written this letter quite possibly later in life. If you were ever into the evangelistic ministry as I was, at one time, you're probably going to be a lot younger, probably 25 to 35 or so. Then you start slowing down some. You're not kidnapping dying people out of the hospital to heal them and stuff like that. This just seems to flow out of somebody that would be a Herodian, certainly, in talking to son and anybody in general to get out of terrorist camps and get back in to the philosophies and religion of your fathers. I was reading about today, I was at the mall sitting and waiting for something, and there was a Time magazine there, and it talked about General Kelly. General Kelly is Trump's head of staff. What do they call that? But he comes from a background, he's a general in the Marines. He comes from a background of military people. In the interview, he talks a lot about all the military men in his family, his uncles, everybody on his block, etc. And of course, it was his son's feeling that he should go to with the blessing of his father, who was, of course, at that time, probably a colonel or something. And his son went to Afghanistan to get some training, and there in the fighting, he got killed. General Kelly's son. Maybe you've heard about him on talk radio. I'm interested in these fellows that Trump is bringing in because now it looks like the politicians, the speech makers, the guys in the blue suits are all out. And they're bringing in the ones in the black suits. They're bringing in a couple of Marine generals, and they're bringing in a Navy general as well. He's got 3 advisors that now are generals. I feel a lot more confident with those guys than I do with some of these idiots that have been in there and working for Obama for the last 8 years in positions of extreme power. I think we need, like the zealots of old, we need to have somebody looking out for our borders, language, and culture. I've been told that I need to be more political, but I just can't. In the end, who really cares? I said I cared, but who can really do anything about it? Best to just, as Sylvanus would say, keep your eyes on your calling. Keep your eyes on your calling. That is your calling in Messiah. There's plenty to do there. And there's plenty of warfare if you're a pugilistic guy like I am. Would love to get in a fight, but no, I would never win one anymore. It's like my dad said, you know, I'm good. He said, Jackie, I'm good for one good punch anymore. But you better watch out for that one punch. I think he said earlier, you know, I will certainly get a meal while the other guy gets a sandwich, but at least I'll eat too. I know I'm off the subject. I'm still a little asleep. Sylvanus. Sylvanus and another guy, Judah or Yehuda Barsabas. I looked up the term Barsabas because there's two guys in there that have this surname. And it means something like son of provision or plenty. I think there's a Joseph Barsabas also, whom I think is Joseph of Arimathea, playing these name games. You can stay up for hours thinking about it when you get some of the language here. Joseph of Arimathea, Joseph Barsabas, Justus or Justice or the Just, thinking that he and Joseph of Arimathea might be the same. I know in Acts when they are trying to replace Judas, they have these two candidates. Look it up for me. Is it Joseph Barsabas Justus? There's another guy, Jesus Barsabas. I think it's Joseph. And there's Matthias. I think this guy's got such an exalted name before he knew anything about this. He has three names, Joseph, Barsabas, Justus, and he's in an election against little Matthias. And little Matthias beats him, even though he has this big, long name. At least I should say, he wins the No, I haven't been drinking, not yet. He wins the hanging Chad. That's as close as I could get. He wins over this guy with the exalted name. I'm thinking, oh, this is so loaded. I'm getting ahead of myself on the Barsabas, Barabbas, and all that stuff. Okay, so let's see. Let me get down here. Silas and Judas, they're called prophets, or Yehuda, bringing messages from James. Prophets and teachers, a term also used in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in Josephus to illuminate some peoples like Judas and Silas, and Josephus used it to denote certain important people, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls just speaks of certain ones and doesn't really identify them. But both have the same modifiers, that these teachers and prophets were strengthening the brethren. And we find that in common with Acts as well. I think I'm in 15 or 16. So we've gotten through Silas, Silvanus, Timothy, Titus, and this one Judas that's stuck with Simon. I'm thinking that this Judas might even be the brother of Joshua, but because wouldn't James, if there was any historical value to this, wouldn't he have sent his brother? And didn't we know from tradition that his brother went east? So maybe Silas is paired up with Yehuda, Judah, Thuda, Thaddeus, Levius, Theudas. Could well be. Strengthening the brethren wherever they went. Certain ones then, again, notorious in some way. The phrase against certain ones comes up also in Acts and Josephus and in Paul. In this particular case, in 13:1 of Acts, we're talking about pillars of the Antiochian church. And here's another one, Niger. It's like there's a bigoted man. Mary tells me this story that where she came from, there was a lot of racial problems. And there was one fellow that was a preacher that he used a particular euphemism that's despicable. And I'll just say it. He said there's plenty of Nigers in the Bible. There's one even right there. It tells you right there. His name is Simeon Niger. Don't tell me there aren't any. Of course, he was a bigot and racist. But the point I'm making is that Niger does mean the black. There's more than one. There's this one, plus there's Abgar, known as the black, plus there's these Syrenese people, a couple I'm going to look at right in a minute, plus we have the eunuch of Kandake that Philip baptizes in a mud puddle somewhere along the road. Of course, at the time, Ethiopia did not have a Kandake, or a queen. Candace, I think it reads in the King James Version. There was no, but certainly there's somebody there that stands in for the eunuch, and it probably is King Abgar. Among other candidates, I think that Eisenman gets into this later on. There's also another Niger, in Josephus, and this fellow, okay, that's it. I'm calling, oh no, not one of these. I'm calling Black Lives Matter. You know, I was talking today with Mary. Mary told me that story, Daniel. This guy was a bigot. Of course, he didn't use the word Niger. He said, he wanted to prove there weren't no, in the Bible. I can't even stand to say it. And he said, right there in Acts, there's one. Well, look, bigots, you know, I've told you the story of me getting called by the Klan, saying they're going to burn me out. And the church boss at one church I was pastoring at said, Brother Jack, said, you've been here, we've been bombarded by them. That kind of thing. That's the way just some of these racist Southerns are. You're never going to get rid of them, especially if they can't read. They can't read what's there. And I asked one fellow way out in the country in Georgia, why is there still such animosity from slave days? Why some of you old guys never get over this? And here's what he told me. He said, because them freed slaves, they got themselves a mule and a quarter acre. Well, my granddaddy didn't have no mule. My granddaddy didn't have no quarter acre. I thought, oh my God, what ignorance. After all these years and the bloodiest war we ever had, and you're still fighting that battle? You know, somebody with that attitude's never going to get anywhere because he's going to be thinking about what granddaddy had or didn't have and what he could have if only his granddaddy had a mule left over from the Civil War battle. In Josephus, there is a fellow named Niger who was a revolutionary turncoat. This is very interesting because he turned as an Idumean, so Eisenman says, against Rome. You see, we had the Idumean army. It matters what you yourself, that's right. My folks came over here right before the Civil War. All they wanted to do was farm. And my cohort at that time, they were being inducted into Napoleon's army at the beginning of the 19th century. Every winter, when the crops were when they weren't cropping in Hesse, which is on the French border of Germany. And so the governor of Hessen-Darmstadt, the state that we're from, when they were farming, he took huge taxes of farm goods. And when we weren't farming, we were in the army fighting as mercenaries for Napoleon on the front lines in Spain, Russia, and in America on the side of the British. The Landgrave of Hesse just simply owned the people, and he rented them out to different countries. Yes, we came over as indentured servants or as ship owners. Go figure. Well, that's true enough, but some of my people, when they were in indentured mercenary business, 2 out of 5, no, wait a minute, that's not right. 1 out of 5 Hessians ever came back. They had 80% kill rate because they put the Hessians on the front line in Spain and in Russia and in America. If you read some of the Revolutionary War stuff, the Hessians had red uniforms on, and the reason they got these krauts over there in the red uniforms was to put them right in front. So the fire would be drawn right to them. And they just were killed in the droves. And so it's hardly any difference from being put on a slave ship and then send to drown, 100 slaves every ship. It's just the whole thing. We ought to unite on this because we're dealing with the same stuff today. It's just a little more hidden than it was. Yeah. We just ought to consider ourselves fortunate for where we ended up and the task at hand. I'm talking about the task at hand being our calling in Messiah. There's nothing more important than that at this point. Amen. So Niger, he was with the Idumean mercenaries, the Herodians. Herods were from Idumea. Idumea was Edom. Edom was Perea on the east side of the Jordan River. And certainly these Idumean in the Habakkuk Pesher are called the violent ones of the Gentiles, because the Jews didn't consider Idumeans to be Jews. They were like half Jews, but the Romans did. And that's why they set up King Herod there, because Herod, in his background, Herod the Great's father was a great statesman for Rome, and he was an Idumean. He was an Edomite, and he won the favor of the Roman Senate for his hard work to put his family in as kings of that area. So it talks about the Idumeans coming down to Jerusalem during the war. This is where we can tie Revelation in a little bit too, because it talks about a great earthquake and that the city was ruptured and in two because of the earthquake. Well, that really happened. And we understand, at least I understand, that Revelation is mostly fulfilled in history. And that where John was, when he was on Patmos, in the spirit, he was in Jerusalem because of what was happening there. And the Revelation is a symbolic retelling of what's going on in Jerusalem during the time that Israel is wasted and Jerusalem is destroyed. So he's there, there's an earthquake there, but it just so happens that outside the gate, these Idumeans, including this particular Niger, with them as the head of these Idumeans, an entire army came up to Jerusalem. They were supposed to be let in by a faction inside Jerusalem. There were 3 factions in there, not to even mention the priests and so forth, 3 military violent factions inside Jerusalem. One faction said, come on in here, you'll help us get rid of the other faction. I bet your governor can tell us the names of the leaders of the faction inside. None of them were any good. And when the Idumeans got there, they wouldn't open the gate for them. And so they had to stay outside, and because they didn't have to march far to get there, they were not prepared for a violent storm, rain, lightning, and an earthquake that very night while they were staying outside. And the next day, they were madder than hornets out of the hive being stirred. And they got into Jerusalem and they just killed everybody. Well, this guy wouldn't do it. He stayed true to the mission either way. And the rest of his Idumeans took him and crucified him. Hope I'm getting this right. And made him carry his own cross and nailed him up because they didn't consider him revolutionary enough or a loyalist enough to whatever cause the wind happened to bring these Idumeans in. So we figure that Niger, whose first name, of course, was Simon, was a man who stuck to his particular loyalties despite the fact that the turncoats inside Jerusalem wouldn't let them in, and his own people despised him so much for that they crucified him. What am I missing here? These same Idumeans, when they got in there, you might remember that the priest that's spoken of in the Habakkuk Pesher, the wicked priest, the one who killed the teacher of righteousness, was in Jerusalem, inside the gates at that time, inside the city, and that these Idumeans, they turned so much that they got a hold of him, Ananus, and they mutilated and killed him on behalf of James the Just and threw him over the city wall down into the ditch below. So the Idumeans took care of Ananus, the wicked priest. Because of James, we understand. We see that in close proximity to Josephus' account of the murder of James. And Niger, who is there also, carries his cross and is crucified because he's not loyal enough to whatever they decided to do. And Eisenman talks about the possibility that Simon Niger or Niger was the template on which Jesus was fashioned, one who carried his cross, yet the cross was taken up by another. What was his name? Was it Simon? The Cyrenian, the Cyrenian. We got something to say concerning Simon here too. He was the template. Jesus, Yeshua, was fashioned from the story of Niger. And Eisenman goes a little farther to use a word that he always likes, tendentious, whatever that means, that the story of Jesus was written by one of Niger himself or one of Niger's followers because of what happened to him. So we go to the next certain other. How's my time? I'm doing good. A certain other is a traveling companion. That is Barnabas or Barnabas. This same man, traveling companion of Paul, that we read about in Paul's letters as well as in the Acts, is called in Acts 4:36 a Cypriot Levite named Joseph. I don't know that that's true or not. That's not what I remembered, but I didn't look it up. Acts 4:36. I thought it was Joseph. Maybe the text has been corrupted. He says it's Joseph Barnabas, the Cypriot. Remember, he comes in right after we have Bar Jesus in Acts 13. The Isle of Cyprus. He says Bar Joseph, and he makes a connection there, but we've got to remember another astonishing correspondence. Cypros, according to Robert's genealogy of the Herods, Paul's mother's name was Cypros, and his sister's name was Cypros. And how would you have that name unless you were from Cyprus? And Paul is connected with Cyprus through Barnabas, who's a Cypriot, remember, a landowner. And he brought everything and laid it before the apostles' feet. Now, if it's Joseph, Robert says, does this bear any resemblance to the fourth brother of Yeshua with the same name, Joseph? Now, you know we've talked about ossuaries, bone boxes that a person in those days, just in the first century, when they died, they were put in a tomb for a year until the bones and the flesh separated. Then they would take the bones and put them in a bone box, just big enough for the biggest bone, the thigh. And of the bone boxes, of the ossuaries, they have found, of course, thousands and thousands and thousands. And if you saw the end of the first Indiana Jones, of that production or franchise, you saw at the end, they opened up a warehouse and it was full of Ark of the Covenants. Well, that idea came from the fact that there is just the same kind of a warehouse at Israel Antiquities Authority, and it's full of ossuaries. And I wouldn't doubt if they just took a picture of the ossuaries, because they look just like smaller sized Ark of the Covenants. Dangerous secrets, that's for sure. What's the point I'm making? All right, I'm kind of losing my track. Of all the ossuaries ever found in Israel that were inscribed with a name, only one. Of the thousands and thousands and thousands inscribed, only one has ever been found with the name Yose on it. We would transliterate that today, Y-O-S-E. It's transliterated from the Latin as Joses, J-O-S-E-S. Where did they find that ossuary? But in the Talpiot tomb, the Jesus family tomb. And there's a fourth brother named Joseph. Not to get too far into this, because I talk too much about it, I think, but there's Joseph in there. There's a Yehuda in there. James is in there. There's Mariamene in there. Maria is in there. And finally, Mattia is in there, who I think is Joseph of Arimathea. So far as I know, they have found the Jesus family tomb, or the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And, oh, Robert just laughs and laughs about this. I'm a believer. He's not. He thinks James is buried out in Spain someplace. Oh, well. Barsabas, Barabbas, the Cypriots, Joseph, Barnabas, Barsabas, Barabbas, Bar-Jesus. We have all those names right there packed in Acts. They're all like Jesus family type names. And first names: Joseph, Joseph, Jesus, Justus. I tell you what, it would be a great research project for somebody to get into this beehive of a million names and just sort them out. He says he'd like to do that, but no, the book would be another 18,000 pages if he did. Jacob bar Joseph, Yehuda bar Joseph, James the Just, Jesus Joseph, etc. Can we go further than we have on these names? Of course we can. Let's go to Solos. In Eisenman's picture of Herod's genealogy, and in Josephus, we have this character, S-A-U-L-O-S. In this book, this Pharisee here that writes about Paul, oh, the secret that Paul was never a Jew, but a convert, that he was never a Pharisee at all, that everything he says and does is Greek. But personally, I don't think that's necessarily wrong. What's wrong with Greek? There's pagan Hebrew too. There's Greek paganism too. But there's also some firmly grounded practices that are completely Hellenistic in Acts and in Paul that work. If you see it work, I'm thinking about, look at the pneumatic gifts, the charismatic gifts, the theory on resurrection of the dead from Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Corinthians 9, Romans 12, Ephesians 4. Not to mention some of the pseudo-Paul writings there that has church administration and deacons and elders and all that. I think I said 1 Corinthians 15, resurrection of the dead. What we know about that? 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 1, where the name Yeshua is introduced. And yes, that's the way Paul pronounced it, Yeshuas. And yes, it's in Greek, and that's the only way to pronounce that name. The point I'm making is there are so many in the Hebrew roots movement that are, anything Greek is pagan. That's like saying anything American is pagan. It just is not so. It just is not so. You might even say about everything, that would be okay. But there's some things that not. It's not. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to Paul. But in the writings of Maccabee, he says that Saul's first name was really Solon, S-O-L-O-N. Well, you'd have to read some of that book. I had to read halfway through it to get to the crux of it. But where did he get the name Paul? That's not even a Greek name. It's a surname. Look, there's one other guy in chapter 13 when Paul reveals, or when the writer of Acts reveals why Saul is called Paul, and that's Sergius Paulus, one of the commissioners of Cyprus. Acts 13, in some of the strangest naming language I've ever seen. The beginning of Acts 13, first 10 verses. Well, I got off the subject a little bit there. Paul, Sergius Paulus. And then we have, we're not getting into Saul today or Paul. If we ever do this again, maybe we'll do that. We have the fourth of the prophets and teachers that are mentioned, Lucius the Cyrenian, or the Cyrenian, or the Libyan. And the connection between this Lucius and the purported author of the Acts, Lucius or Lucas or Lucius. At the time, this Libya, this Cyrene or Cyrene, is a hotbed of Jewish sectarianism and zealotry. I mean, there are rebels like crazy right over on the other side of Egypt. You remember, Egypt was completely Hellenist this time, but it had a larger Jewish population, and there were zealots there, but in smaller amounts because the government was under the government of Rome again. And Rome pretty much later wiped out the true Hebrews and Jews out of there, but in Libya, they were free to go. In Libya, just as today, then they were terrorists there. It's a no man's land. Cyrene was a hotbed of terrorism then and now, with the Hellenistic Egypt, a buffer zone in between Palestine and Libya. Now, though the title of Sicarii might not be a considerably good title for Simon or Shimon the Cyrene, Simon the Cyrene, who, like Simon the Niger, or Niger, carried the cross. They both did. Is that something? We have Simon the Black, and Simon of Cyrene was certainly black, one in Josephus, one in the Gospels, carrying a cross. So many of these things, I just want to get into Josephus and read again about them and try to figure this out. Or I could go have another drink of kratom, and forget about it. So we next go, we're getting down to the end here, to Simeon Bar Clopas. In fact, I think we probably ought to stop with him because time's up anyway. I've got to get all this stuff in 50 minutes. I really appreciate you being here to be an audience for this, because I would never do this if there wasn't somebody interested in it. Now, we'll pick it up later, okay? I'm going to go out and eat some poison mushrooms now. Not really. But I am tired. Can you tell? If you'd like to hear, if you'd like to get a little bit stimulated right now before you want to go to bed, I could send you a link to the Shroom Coffee jingle. In fact, I should just do that. And then you can play this great piece all you want. There. You find it. Oh, I know you like this. You want to perk yourself up? Well, I can say this. This one's for you. There you go. Click on it. Get perked up, and I'll end the meeting. Thanks for coming. We had 9 here tonight. That's really good. That's really good for Wednesday night.